Do you know the boss, Dana White, has banned the best MMA stars after getting furious acts from their side? Yes, they have all been banned from the octagon. Are you curious about their acts that create the possibility of making a decision against these stars?
The lock and he didn't let it go. Finally he let it go, but yeah, I'm gonna cut him too.
In this video, we will reveal all about these star MMA fighters. Without further delay, let's begin. The boss, Dana White, president of the world-famous UFC, now has complete power over the ban on MMA stars.
These guys are professional athletes. You don't ever hit a guy blatantly after the bell like that. That will not ever be tolerated, and he's done. I don't care if he fights in every show all over the world and becomes the best, and everybody thinks he's the pound-for-pound best in the world. He will never fight in the UFC ever again.
And it is believed that the number of people banned is certainly higher. Do you know which UFC fighters are banned from stepping back into the octagon? We will reveal it in this video, so keep watching. At first, the most famous was BJ Penn. Yes, a name you may have assumed shouldn't be on our list. He broke a bundle of records and made headlines when he was younger. Sadly, he was unable to discern when to let up and went on a losing streak of 7 fights until getting caught in a videotaped altercation in a pub. Dana White declared,
He won't fight again.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it. That's a wrap.
Why is this the last straw? I mean,
It's not even that this was the last straw. It's, I didn't love him continuing to fight anyway, but when you have the relationship that he and I have, and he's getting me on the phone, you know, begging me for another fight, begging me for another opportunity, it's hard for me to, you know, to turn him down.
So, what are the final words on Dana White's decision?
But after what I saw on that video, BJ needs to, he needs to focus on his personal life and get himself together before he thinks about fighting again.
And then secondly, a strong fighter with a potential future, Thiago Silva. His plans were disrupted by allegations of domestic abuse involving his divorced wife and coach, Pablo Popovich. But on September 4th, Thiago Silva's allegations were dropped, and he was freed from custody and found not guilty, clearing the path for his UFC comeback. On Monday's episode of the MMA Hour with Ariel Helwani, Silva made the following statement: "I never pointed a gun at my ex-wife." Now that so much of the case's evidence is out, was Thiago Silva truly innocent, or did he simply happen to strike it lucky? No, Thiago was later fired after a video from the initial incident came out, showing Thiago was at fault. Another fighter before joining the UFC, Mayhem was well known for his appearances on Bully Beatdown and his epic fight with the Diaz brothers on Strikeforce. As such, he didn't seem to fit in with the organization. In the Ultimate Fighter competition, he had the opportunity to coach, but ultimately lost to rival coach Michael Bisping. White let him leave after he lost against CB Dalloway as well, saying that
You want to be a clown? You can do that later. Do that on your reality show.
Dana responded.
Then something happened here backstage after Mayhem's done. He's gone.
What happened, Cheryl?
Just some bullshit that I don't want to talk about.
Now, Dana White had a thing for Couture, who is still the most decorated UFC champion to this day. Have you known about Couture before? He defeated the greatest fighters in the UFC in the late 2000s and early 2010s. Regretfully, Spike's relationship with Bellator, the UFC's primary opponent, at the time of his contract signing with them after he retired, angered Dana White. In 2013, Dana banned Couture from cornering his own son, Ryan Couture, in a UFC match.
He's not cornering him. Randy Couture can't buy a ticket to this mother.
With Ryan competing and not allowing me to continue to progress and work with my son in his fight career, it is ridiculous, Couture stated, and that bothers me. Further, he stated that Randy was not even allowed to purchase a UFC ticket. That was all it took for Dana to ban him, which prevented Daly from ever making a comeback to the octagon, but allowed him to have a great career in Bellator.
Couture comes off as the greatest guy in the world, Captain America. He's the furthest thing from it, and I'm happy to not be in business with him anymore.
And then, regretfully, another famous fighter, Jonathan Copenhaver's behaviors outside of the octagon received more attention than his actions within it. He only participated in 2 UFC fights before being dropped due to his inconsiderate remarks over Evan Tainer's untimely death and his refusal to accept a challenge. Following an attack on his fiancée, Christy Mack, the member of Ultimate Fighter 6 was charged with 29 offenses and given a 36-year prison sentence. So, who's next, guys? There was a cast member of Ultimate Fighter 3 from Canada who appeared to have a bright future in the UFC. Yes, he was Caleb Starnes. Nevertheless, he was dubbed the Running Man after spending 3 rounds almost running away from opponent Nate Quarry in his debut UFC match at UFC 38. After that, he was promptly removed from the UFC fighter list, but he continued to fight and enjoyed a successful career. And then, Caleb Starnes is facing a difficult situation. He has a rib injury that seems to be permanent. He has a foot injury that raised doubts about the accuracy of both injuries, no UFC contract, a reputation for lacking sympathy, and he has destroyed social and professional circles. Do you know the first athlete that USADA has ever banned? Yes, this was Ruslan Magomedov. The Russian heavyweight might have been a Dagestani celebrity before Khabib, but he had multiple run-ins with USADA over the use of anabolic steroids. They obtained several suspensions for him. Ruslan's refusal to submit a sample from the competition was the last straw, which won him the first ever UFC fighter USADA ban. Next is a famous offender, Palares. He was the first leg reaper that anybody had to be afraid of. At the time, he was the most technically proficient person in leg locks, but he had the bad tendency of hanging on the submissions for too long. Similarly, one such example seems to be at UFC 111, where he defeated Thomas Derval via submission in the second round, although he was ultimately suspended for 90 days for maintaining the submission after the taps. At UFC Fight Night 29, he performed the same action following Mike Pierce's 8 taps before Rousimar let go. He was promptly banned and dropped from the UFC.
And this is the second incident we've had with Paul Harris, where he had the lock and he didn't let it go. Finally, he let it go, but yeah, I'm gonna cut him too.
Not just a suspension, he's done.
He's done.
So, one of the most exciting UFC fighters to emerge from the Ultimate Fighter 7 series was Matt Riddle. But who's at fault? Why had he dropped from the UFC? His fault was that he was repeatedly busted for marijuana use, which angered Dana White.
You're so weak-minded and so addicted to marijuana that you couldn't stay off it enough to pass a drug test 3 times a year. Well, guess what, dummy? They drug test in the real world, too.
He labeled him a fool for not being able to refrain from marijuana, even though he was aware that testing was imminent. He explained after being dropped from the UFC that he had acquired a medical marijuana license, which allows him to smoke without legal ramifications. After being dropped from the UFC, he had a prosperous career in the WWE. The British mixed martial artist Paul Daley Mtex competed in the UFC at the beginning of the decade. He got off to a strong start and was soon matched with Josh Koscheck, who was a title challenger and contender at the time. Koscheck's constant trash-talking, which continued even during the match, left Paul Daley so shaken that Semtex decided it would be wise to sucker punch Koscheck after the bell had rung. That was all it took for Dana to ban him, which prevented Daley from ever making a comeback to the octagon.
These guys are professional athletes. You don't ever hit a guy blatantly after the bell like that. That will not ever be tolerated, and he's done. I don't care if he fights in every show all over the world and becomes the best, and everybody thinks he's the pound-for-pound best in the world. He will never fight in the UFC, ever.
But this allowed him to have a great career in Bellator. So, all these fighters have had the best careers so far. They performed well in their professional fights. But the thing that made them banned by the UFC were the possible acts done illegally against the regulations to be in the UFC. But here's a question: have they lost their careers after that ban? So the answer is no. They got them into other organizations, just like Matt Riddle in WWE, Paul Daley in Bellator, and Ryan Couture in Bellator. They made achievements in their fights and brought their careers to a remarkable end. So, these are the MMA fighters who were skipped from the UFC after being noted against any illegal doing, which gave Dana White the opportunity to close the doors of the UFC for them. Have you ever heard about them before? What is the most unwanted ban among all those fighters? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. Stay tuned for the next video. Until next time.